Hey YouTube, it's EbMagician34 with the top 100 plus 9 most interesting cards in Yu-Gi-Oh!, at least currently. And this is part 70 through 31. And we're going to kick off with card number 70, Stardust Dragon. It's the repeatability of his effect, and the fact that he's so very abusable and yet has never received a limitation makes him quite interesting. Next up, one of my personal favorite cards from the ban list, Chaos Emperor Dragon. So easy to summon. And the fact that he's one of the few cards in the game that can clean hands and field and says send to the grave, not destroy, mind-blowingly powerful. Almost always should be a game win when you pop this guy. Beckoning Light ranks in next. Incredibly flexible, and it promises to be very good in concert with the new Fabled monsters, too. I mean, just pounding, 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 so good. Surprising for a card that was ignored for so long. Next up, Dragonic Queen of Tragic Endings. She doesn't sacrifice anything to special summon herself, just have 3 continuous spells on the field. Lots of ways to do that. And she eats one to come back from your graveyard during your standby phase, over and over again. And if she ever deals damage to your opponent, doesn't matter whether it's direct attack or not, she even gets you a card and pitches a card from their hand all at the same time. A just monstrously nasty effect. Next up, how much hate can we hate with? Consecrated Light, the ultimate answer to dark monsters, at least for now, and they'd be hard-pressed to come up with a card that was worse for them if it didn't just say straight up, you lose if you have any dark monsters. Staggeringly good for a 0/0 that you actually want to summon in attack mode. Stops so many decks. Arcus is next, coming in at number 65, I believe. The fact that you can't target light monsters, nobody can, in any location, it's amazing how often this guy creates game-winning sweeps. Quite powerful. Another blast from the past, Dark Magician, comes in at 64. He probably has, I haven't actually counted, but I'm pretty sure he's got the most individual card interactions, like cards specifically designed for him and things that he coincidentally interacts with, than any other card in the game. And that's saying something. And he may arguably be the most iconic card of Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's pretty gosh darn interesting. After that, Phantom of Chaos. His ability to mimic any monster in the game is mind-blowing, and just because he can't deal battle damage doesn't mean he can't deal effect damage. Neospatian Grand Mole, probably the best way to get rid of any threat, and with Synchros out, he's very good indeed. It's strange that people think so much of Gundari when this guy's just a 100% improved version of him. Yatagarasu, a 200-point monster who so often just means game. He even hops back off the field, forcing you to use up your normal summon every turn, and yet he's still so broken and so powerful. Alright, ranking in at number 60, Monster Reborn. The reason this makes the list is it's not just the simple power of being able to get back any monster from your grave, it's the fact that it gets them from your opponents too. So anytime this card's legal in the format, it forces players to really think about their next move, and that's compelling. Next up, Ancient Sacred Wyvern. Probably the best, most usable version of the Agent of Mars effect. Easily a one-shot kill. Starlight Road, because why negate a powerful sweep once when you can negate it twice? Injection Fairy Lily. Just a surprise, but not a surprise. Just pretty much the epitome of balls to the wall, which is strange for a monster who, at least I would hope, does not, well, never mind. Next up, Grave of the Super Ancient Organism. It's just staggering how many cards this affects. It's a very powerful stall card, and one which monarchs should probably entertain the notion of running. Reptilian Voski makes the next slot. Reason is, while she may not be necessarily that easy to summon, when she does come out, she basically just straight up -3s your opponent, which is staggering in terms of card advantage, and she's even 2600 to boot. So, definitely an intriguing ability. Destiny Hero Diamond Dude comes in after that. The ability to pop for free any normal spell, well, albeit on the following turn, makes this guy fantastic. That and his interaction with one of the best archetypes of the game. Next, Gandora, the Dragon of Destruction. Destroy and remove all cards on the field, and it only costs you half your life points. Another guy who the new Monarch decks might even want to play with. DD Survivor. DD Survivor is so interesting just because he can repeatedly come back almost endlessly, but off an effect that is inherently almost never happens. You have to make it happen. But 1800 is so great, and even in these days of synchros, he's still very playable. Coming in at number 51 is Cold Wave. Once again, for a -1, it has an amazing amount of power, and in the absence of Heavy Storm, it's pretty much the next best thing, and so many decks do so many tricks that they basically wouldn't ever get away with without this card backing them up. And it's often good just for forcing things out, and can even buy you 2 turns worth of protection if you play it when your opponent has nothing on their back row to begin with. Power Tool Dragon ranks in at number 50, and the reason Power Tool Dragon makes it is because he is a potentially endless source of +1s. And granted, they're equip spells, but when playing correctly, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think Gigavi's taught us that. And it's amazing that he got so little attention when he very first got out, and he's still one of the best sources of continuous card advantage that exists, plus he's self-preserving. Scrap Dragon comes in after that, a card which is already very good and makes a scrap deck possible even now with frightening amounts of consistency. A guy who you can easily run and play 3 of from your extra deck is about to get a whole lot better with Starstrike the Last. Bryanak makes the list next, not necessarily because his power to make everything go away and then instantly sweep for game is that powerful. What's weird about him is the fact that he can allow you to pitch any number of cards simultaneously to his effect, meaning you can bounce, say, 2, 3 monsters, your opponent's whole field of monsters, away, and still manage to get it even if your opponent bottomlesses him, whereas most other cards you'll find that have an effect like this make you do the cards one at a time. So, this overwhelming and intriguing ability makes him get the list, although Effect Veiler will definitely punish you for that. Royal Firestorm Guards comes next, basically because there are so few cards in the game that just straight up +2 you. He stays on the field, and while he's not necessarily recommended for Flamvels, he and Volcanics definitely get along. Next is Deep Sea Diva, not because she's one of the many tuners or monsters that can go get a tuner and basically instantly poof up a synchro, but because she has the versatility to potentially get a second tuner, so you can sync and then sync again. And she's very retrievable with cards like Salvage. It's just a really playable card. Amazoness Queen comes in next, because a blanket monsters don't get destroyed by battle effect like hers is very rare, not to mention the fact that it's on a 1-to-beat monster with a decent attack. Plus, she's good looking, let's be honest. Tsukuyomi is next. So very playable. Once again, a card that doesn't theoretically offer you much in terms of card advantage, yet the ability to repeat abuse flips or kill monsters in defense position, Tsukuyomi does so many things. Destiny Hero Dasher makes the next slot, basically because of his novelty. His activation from the grave is quite neat, and his play with the creator is not to be ignored. Wat Chimera is next, pretty much a single-handed shutdown card. Very interesting way to go. And with Messenger of Peace, so this guy's just downright obnoxious and can even be the next best thing to Yatagarasu we're probably ever going to get. Necroface is number 41. Because it can play both sides of the fence, remove and get rid of removals. And these days, just as in the past, has some really cool potential to shut down opposing decks, or at least annoy the heck out of them. Plus, we can't ignore that it does have a really cool OTK deck. Which, granted, you can only work really with 3 of them. But Witch of the Black Rose comes in at number 40. Her ability is just so novel. I mean, she's pretty much all or nothing, and she's very difficult to get off to actually turn into a synchro, especially since she can't be special summoned. But in the correct deck, like say an Orlaris deck, she can actually turn out to be very potent. And it's easy to miss that at first. Plus, she's a very nice little Gothic Lolita. But anyway. Raging Mad Plants actually makes the next slot. Reason being, it's an easily overlooked but potentially very devastating card. Essentially a plant version of limiter removal, and you can run 3 of it. And yes, of course, because it's changing attack scores, it can be activated in the damage step when very little can be done about it. Next up are actually 2 cards that make 1 slot. And that is basically the Water Omatics and Fairy of the Fountain. Reason being, these are probably some of the most needing of Konami's incredibly mind-numbingly heavy censorship. because, well, she has an English version which you pretty much only ever see in video games, where she's wearing a white robe to cover her. And Water Amatic's Japanese version is this, but imagine it without the scales. Yeah, it's just so shocking and strange, and if you don't have the Japanese versions of them, you really ought to get them just for grins. So that's why they make that slot. Charge of the Light Brigade is next, not because it's a Rhoda plus another effect, that is essentially a search your deck for a card and add it to your hand effect with a bonus, but also the fact that that bonus of discarding 3 cards has gotten this, well, technically off the top of your deck, has actually gotten this card a position in decks that really didn't even need Light Swords, like Scraps, for instance. It's the fact that it proves that sending cards from the top of your deck to the grave is such a good effect in this game that people will even splash for it. Victory Dragon comes up next, the only one of his kind to ever, yes, there are other cards like him, but they're not even legally playable and say so on the card. He's the only one who ever was playable, and I maintain that this guy basically got banned because of the incredible rulings headache he was. Torrential Tribute is next, not because of its incredible power. Once again, this is about weird and compelling cards with effects that are memorable, but it's because of how much it makes players think, and how Torrential Tribute gets played kind of separates the men from the boys, so to speak. So it's often a very telling card depending on how people play it, and it's still very influential even though it's so very old. Chimeratech Overdragon is next. He was very briefly the most feared card in the format, and his weird fuse virtually any number of things effect and attack so many times, he's just an incredible amount of damage. Next is Thousand Eyes Restrict, because why go overboard when you can go overboard and then swim 50 feet away? Thousand Eyes Restrict is just so many powerful effects wrapped into one that it's mind-boggling. Relinquished ranks in next after that. His little brother. The reason I find him a little bit more interesting is because he has the easiest way to repeat abuse his effect, whereas Thousand Eyes Restrict needed, say, Tsukuyomi or Book of Moon to help him out. Plague Spreader Zombie wraps this part of the countdown out at 31. Basically because spinning to the top of your deck is one of the worst things that can happen to you, yet this is one of the most powerful cards, and still the only zombie tuner we have. And that is 70 through 31. Tune in, you've seen what's happened so far, see if your favorite cards make it to the top 30.